This week on Jerusalem Dateline, an Easter special remembering the final days of Jesus and the places where his passion took place in Jerusalem, from the Mount of Olives to the Upper Room, the Garden of Gethsemane, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Plus, a tour of the place where many people believe Jesus was buried and rose from the dead, the Garden Tomb. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this special Easter edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. On Easter Sunday, millions of Christians around the world celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. I'm here in Jerusalem's Old City on the Via Dolorosa, the place many people believe was the path Jesus took on his way to the crucifixion. Here's a look at the steps of Jesus here in Jerusalem, from the night he celebrated the Passover meal to the resurrection. Welcome to Jerusalem and to the Mount of Olives. From this vantage point, you get an amazing panoramic view of the city and see the sights described in the Gospels about the passion of Jesus, from the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane to the resurrection in the Garden Tomb. We start our journey over there on Mount Zion and the site of the Last Supper. Across the valley from the Mount of Olives, here on Mount Zion, is the Upper Room, the traditional site where Jesus celebrated the Passover meal with his disciples, the Last Supper. Here's how the Gospel of Mark tells the story. And he sent out two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared. There make ready for us." So his disciples went out and came into the city and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. In the evening he came with the 12. Now as they sat and ate, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me." And they began to be sorrowful and to say to him one by one, "Is it I?" And another said, "Is it I?" He answered and said to them, "It is one of the 12 who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had never been born." And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. Assuredly I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. After the Last Supper on Mount Zion, Jesus and his disciples came here to the Garden of Gethsemane at the bottom of the Mount of Olives. And hear how it's described in the Gospel of Luke. Coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives, as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." And while he was still speaking, behold, a multitude, and he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" After Judas betrayed Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane across the Kidron Valley, they brought him here to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. Today, it's the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu. Gallicantu means the rooster crowed, and it's the place where Peter denied Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed. Here's how the book of Matthew describes what happened to Jesus when he was brought before the high priest Caiaphas. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard. And he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Up next, Jesus is brought before Pilate, led to his crucifixion, and then rose from the dead. This is another section of the Via Dolorosa, the place where many people believe Jesus took on his way to the crucifixion. On our journey, we've been to the upper room, the house of Caiaphas, and the Garden of Gethsemane. Here's the rest of the story as described in the Gospels. After Jesus was brought before the high priest, he was then brought before Pontius Pilate. This area just outside the walls of the old city is known as the Seat of Pilate. Many people believe 2,000 years ago, this was a gate into the palace of King Herod, where Pilate judged Jesus. This is how the Gospel of John described their meeting. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. And it was early morning, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." Then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death," that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this? Or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" Then they all cried again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. So the crowd demanded that Barabbas be released and Jesus be crucified. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to death. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where many people believe Jesus was crucified, died, was buried, and rose from the dead. This is how the Gospel of Mark described what happened. And they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated, place of a skull. Then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he did not take it. And when they crucified him, they divided his garments, casting lots for them to determine what every man should take. Now it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. And the inscription of his accusation was written above, "The King of the Jews." With him they also crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. And so the scripture was fulfilled, which says, "And he was numbered with the transgressors." And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also mocking among themselves with the scribes said, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Even those who were crucified with him reviled him. Now when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who stood by when they heard that said, Look, he is calling for Elijah. Then someone ran and filled a sponge full of sour wine, put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink, saying, Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. Then the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So when the centurion who stood opposite him saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, Truly, this man was the Son of God. Then Mark tells us that Joseph of Arimathea took the body of Jesus and laid him in a tomb. Then on the morning of the 3rd day, Mark tells us the rest of the story. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices, that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning on the 1st day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they said among themselves, Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb from us? And when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe, sitting on the right side. And they were alarmed. But he said to them, Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who is crucified. He is risen. And people all over the world say, He is risen indeed. Coming up, a tour of the Garden Tomb, the place many believe Jesus was crucified, buried, and rose from the dead. I'm standing inside the walls of the old city near the Jaffa Gate, and just like 2,000 years ago, people come from all over to celebrate the Passover here in Jerusalem. There are 2 locations where many people believe Jesus was buried and rose from the dead. We've just seen the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The other is called the Garden Tomb. Here's a tour of the Garden Tomb and why many people believe this is the site where Jesus was buried and rose from the dead. Welcome to the Garden Tomb, one of my favorite places in all of Jerusalem, and the ideal location to come during the Easter season. We have Cesar here from the Garden Tomb Association to give us a tour.
Hi Chris, welcome to the Garden Tomb. It's so good to have you here with us today.
Great to be with you. Tell us about the history of the Garden Tomb.
There's so much history in this place. Beginning in 1842, people began to identify this place as another possibility for the place of the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ for 3 main reasons. One of the main elements that attracted people to the location had to do with the location of the site in relation to the old city. According to what we see in the Gospel of John chapter 19, our Lord Jesus Christ was crucified. He was led out to a place called Golgotha, which was outside the city. John specifies that the place of the crucifixion was near the city. Now, when you go to the platform where you can see the place of the skull, there you can see a section of the northern wall of the old city of today. And that section of the northern wall that you can see today actually follows the original location of the northern wall that was there at the time of Jesus.
So outside the walls.
Outside the walls, near the city, according to what we see in John. And also we see in the book of Hebrews chapter 13 that Jesus, in order to sanctify the people with his own blood, he suffered outside the city gate. Not too far from this location we have Damascus Gate, which would have been a prominent gate at the 1st century on the northern side. The second reason that attracted people to the place had to do with the appearance of the place, the resemblance of a skull on the side of the hill. In the Gospel of Mark chapter 15 in verse 22, we read that they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha. And the name Golgotha, or Golgotha in the Aramaic language, simply means skull. And in English, people use the word Calvary, which comes from the Latin Calvaria, which also means skull. In antiquity, it was very common for people to name places after things that people could relate to. So people began to associate the appearance of the place with the meaning of the name of the place where Jesus was crucified.
And I understand you also have a wine press here from the time of Jesus.
That is correct. And that leads us to the third point. And for that, let me show you this part of the garden.
Sure.
So the third reason that attracted people to this site had to do with the location of this property in relation to the possible place of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In the Gospel of John chapter 19 in verse 41, we read that in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one was buried before. According to John, the place of the crucifixion and the tomb, they were very close to each other. And John also tells us that in the property where the tomb was, there was a garden. Now, the strongest evidence that we have of a garden from the time of the first century was the discovery of what you see down below right now.
So this is a wine press.
This is part of a wine press. It's important to clarify that. This is one of the most common types of wine presses that you can find here in the land of Israel. This is the basic type or the basic model, which is made up of 2 tiers, okay? Now today we don't see the actual treading floor because it is located somewhere underneath that platform. The garden tomb is yet to do more excavations here. What we see over here was discovered in the 1920s, back in 1924, and this is the lower tier or the bottom tier of the wine press. This is known as the collecting vat. This is the place where they would have collected the must or the juice to start the fermentation process to produce wine. And this was a significant discovery for the place because it tells us that this place right here was used as a garden, more specifically as a vineyard in ancient times.
Back to the time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago.
Possibly at the time of Jesus. We still got to do more excavations in order to say 100% this is from the time of the first century. But let me take you now to the most important element in this place.
The tomb itself.
Exactly. So follow me. Now this is the most important element of the site. And I believe it's the most important element of the story itself. Just like what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, when he talks about the event of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul says that if there is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ is not risen. And if Christ is not risen, then our preaching is empty and your faith is void. This will be a waste of time if there's a body inside this tomb. So here we are in the first chamber. This chamber is known as the Indy Chamber, just a fancy name for the first chamber of access for the family. This was the place where the family would prepare the body for burial. And this was also the place where the family would have had the final morning ritual. In fact, right here where I'm standing over here, there was a stone bench. And this is the place where they will lay the body to do the preparation of the body, but also this was the place where the body will stay for the morning ritual. And after that, they would transfer the body and they will store the body in the burial chamber where you can see 1, 2, and 3 burial places. Today, you don't see the burial benches anymore because the tomb was remodeled. It was reused in antiquity.
Cesar, this is an amazing place. Let's go outside and tell me more about why you think this was actually the tomb of Jesus.
I think it's important to clarify that we don't make any dogmatic claims about the tomb. We don't say this is the tomb, but we say that it is a possibility because it fits the biblical description. And all the features that you see inside the tomb, all the features that you see in this property fit the details that we see in the gospel accounts. And we see, for instance, the layout of the tomb matches with the description that we see in the Gospel of Mark chapter 16, also in the Gospel of John. So there are many elements that fit the biblical profile.
So Cesar, what's the meaning of Easter and what's the message here in the garden tomb?
It's an empty tomb because on the third day, Jesus Christ was physically risen from the dead. And that is the most important element of the story. It would have been a waste of time if there was still a body inside the tomb, but He rose from the dead. He defeated death. He defeated the power of sin. And He is alive today because He is the Lord of life. And He is physically alive today to give new life to those who put their trust in the perfect sacrifice that Jesus Christ performed at the cross of Calvary.
Cesar, that's the perfect message for Easter. Thank you so much for your tour here of the garden tomb. And look forward to having many people come back here and see this for themselves.
And we also look forward to having many visitors in this place. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to proclaim this powerful message to the world.
Thank you so much, Cesar.
God bless you.
Up next, CBN presents an Easter service from the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. I'm outside the walls of the old city and near where King Herod had his palace 2,000 years ago. You've just seen a tour of the Garden Tomb. This year, CBN will be broadcasting the Easter service of the Garden Tomb. And despite all the challenges and changes of COVID-19, the timeless message of the gospel remains the same. Here's a sample of the worship. Thanks for joining us on this special Easter program. After the resurrection of Jesus, his good news of the kingdom spread around the world from here in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. That's why so many believers come here to Jerusalem to see for themselves the sites where the Passion of Jesus took place. During the season of the worldwide COVID pandemic, when travel is restricted here in Israel, we hope you've enjoyed this journey through the city and through the Gospels of the greatest story ever told. On this Easter Sunday, millions of Christians around the world will celebrate that story with the words, "He is risen indeed." I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.